Unfortunately, I can turn on demonstration of my screen. I'm not allowed to.
I can fix that. Okay, you should be able to now.
So yes, Jay, we are online.
Okay. I'd like to welcome everybody, both the members of our class and those who might be viewing outside on the YouTube live stream, to the open course on the rise and fall of complex societies, or rise and collapse of complex societies. Today we're having two presentations, so we're having two courses actually back to back, so it's kind of a marathon tonight. We're going to start with Rapa Nui, or Easter Island. We'll have a presentation and then a discussion, I hope, on the circumstances that we think led to the collapse of Easter Island, and then we'll take a look at the Khmer Empire from Cambodia and do the same. Between the two classes, after we finish the talk on Rapa Nui and we finish the discussion, we'll take a break, and then about 7:20, we'll go ahead and start up with the talk on the Khmer. So without further ado, I want to welcome our Easter Island team and hand control over to them.
Well, okay. Can we start? Yeah?
Yes, please.
Okay, hello there. It's our Rapa Nui team, and today we're gonna talk about Easter Island. And before we talk about collapse, I want to say you why the name is Easter Island, why we have it now. So, okay. During his travel, Jacob Roggeveen discovered the island, and it happened on Sunday, April the 5th, in 1722. That year, exactly on that day, was the celebration of Easter according to Christian calendar. He named the island in honor of this holiday. From Dutch, Pageland translates as Easter Island, so it's the same. And currently, Easter Island is under the jurisdiction of Hispanic state, Chile. Therefore, the official name of the island is Isla de Pascua. Until the end of the 19th century, the island was the center of slave trade in South America, and the phrase Rapa Nui, or Great Rapa, was used as a name in the classification of people to distinguish its inhabitants from the population of other islands in the South Pacific. They were called Rapa in those days. So it's about the name. Next slide, please. Thank you. And now we're gonna talk about geography of this island. Easter Island is an island in the southeastern Pacific Ocean, and at the moment is the territory of Chile, as I said before. The island is the remotest from the continent inhabited island in the world. So the distance to the continental coast of Chile is 3,514 kilometers. The area of the island is about 164 square kilometers. Easter Island is an island of volcanic origin. The most fertile soil is located in the north of the island. The most common rocks on the island are basalt, obsidian, rhyolite, and trachyte. The climate of Easter Island is warm and tropical, and the main source of fresh water on the island is the lakes formed in the craters of the local volcanoes. There are no rivers on the island, and rainwater easily seeps from the soil, forming groundwater flowing towards the ocean. The flora of the island is very poor, and many endemic species was exterminated. The main part of the fauna is made up of marine animals, and before Europeans arrived, the only animal for breeding were chickens. With the arrival of Europeans, rats, which were carriers of diseases unknown to the locals, got to the island. And at that moment, local rats, which Rapa Nui used as food, became Now we're going to talk about European contact with this civilization, and the first recorded European contact with the island took place on April the 5th, as I said before, in 1722, when the Dutch navigator Jacob Roggeveen visited it for a week, and according to his estimates, from 2,000 to 3,000 inhabitants lived on the island. However, it was not a census, I think, but only estimated judgment. So the following foreign guest arrived on November 15th in 1770. It was two Spanish ships under the command of Felipe González de Ajedo. They stayed on the island for 5 days, carefully exploring the coast. They called it Isla de San Carlos, or San Carlos Island in English, starting the process of owning it on behalf of the King of Spain, Charles III. The next visit came 4 years later. It was an expedition of James Cook, but Cook himself didn't investigate the island in view of his disease. A group exploring the island reported that some statues fell and the land itself is poor. According to Cook's estimates, there were about 700 people on the island. Part of the island was seeded with bananas, sugarcane, and sweet potatoes. The rest of the land looked abundant. George Forster made an important observation, noting that there were no tall trees on the island. An important visit to the island was arrival of the French explorer Jean-François de Galap La Paris, April the 10th in 1786. He drew up a detailed map of Easter Island, noting that 1/10 of the island was cultivated and the population was about 2,000 people. Next visits were in 1804. It was Russian ship the Neva. 1816, Russian ship Rurik, and in 1825, British ship HMS Blossom. An important moment in the history of the island was the arrival of Alexander Selman Jr. in 1868, who ruled the island for 10 years. At this time, the development of Rapa Nui art, linguistic changes in the local language, and some changes in religion took place. Also at this time, archaeological and ethnographic studies of the Easter Island were carried out. In September 9th, 1888, Easter Island was annexed to Chile in accordance with agreement between the government of Chile and Rapa Nui. Years later, in 1914, long archaeological and ethnographic explorations of the island began, which took 17 months.
So let's continue with demography. So first of all, I would like to notice that the year when Rapa Nui came to the island is very debatable, but some, like more bigger evidences we point us to the period of time since 800 to 1200 years. And according to some data, there were around 200 people. Later, as we know, as you will know later, Eastern Island has really good soil for agriculture, and it allowed Rapa Nui to have population around 11,000 or 12,000 to 15,000 people. And we don't really know when they have this peak of population, but approximately it's around 14,000 to 1,040, 1,400 to 1,500, sorry. And but we know strongly that when Europeans arrived to the island, they got only 3,000 people. And later in 1744, they got 2,000 people. So much lesser than they probably had in the past, and later they got more and more problem that has an impact to the demography. So let's take a look to 1860s, when Peruvian slave traders took half of the population. But a few years ago, anti-slavery movement forced the slave traders to free Rapa Nui. However, by the time half of enslaved Rapa Nui died because of disease that were common for Europeans, but were terrible for Rapa Nui because they had no immune system, and it was smallpox and tuberculosis. And so half of the enslaved people died because of those disease, but also survived, bring this disease to the island. And so after a big epidemic, in the end of 60s, there were around 900 people. And in 1874, after the deportation of locals to Tahiti, there were around 150 people. So in this year, the most of the territory of the Easter Island was bought by a French soldier, and he created here a sheep rancho. And so because of it, some of the locals were deported to Tahiti. And it's difficult to, make a picture in your mind. So I bring there some graph, and you can see that when there are 200 people, the time of arrival, and then we have got some period of time when they have around 1,200 people. They got 11,000 people, and then something happened. We don't know exactly what happened, and we will talk about a little bit later. And Europeans, faced with a little population of 3,000 people, then we got slavery diseases and got migration. So for some time we got a lot of people, like increasing of population, and then we got decreasing of population. If we mostly know what happened after Europeans arrive, but we don't know exactly what happened between 12,000 people and 3,000 people. So, and there is we faced with the theories of collapse. So we all read Jared Diamond's book, and probably you remember some points about Easter Island, and his theory is about eco-suicide. So Rapa Nui cut down all trees because they, had a lot of population, have a lot of people in the island. They need space for garden for agriculture. They also need to build building materials to create new houses, and also use palm trees for firewood. And also there is some hypothesis that trees was used to transport moai. It's a giant stone statues. You probably know how they look like. So they use logs like a conveyor belt. And also there is the quote from the book, why one of Diamond students, why were they thinking when they cut down the last palm tree? But Terry Hunt and Carol Lipo a little bit disagree with that, and they think that's the reason of the vanishing of all trees in the island was Pacific rats, and that rats ate all tree seeds and distract all root system. So it's why we don't have a lot of trees now, but in the previous times we got archaeological evidences that there was a lot of big forests, and 70% of the island was with the woods. Also, there is one more point that helped them to collapse. It's also Europeans, and as you just learned, they brought disease and also enslaved half of the population. And also almost complete disappearance of local culture and religion due to both the Rapa Nui people and Europeans. In the case of social structure, is not too complex as maybe in other civilizations, but also very interesting and unique in some sense. So Rapa Nui settlers divided into several clans with the main 8. These 8 clans led by 8 sons of the chief, of the original chief that was one of the first people in one of the first settlers in Eastern Island, and traditionally they call the main chief Hotumatao. It's some kind of like a tsar or king, and it's translated like a great parent. And their clans' territories, not like different states, but more like a subjects inside the country, and they have had elections for position of Hotumatao between each other.
And now I want to present you the characterization of vegetation and agriculture on Easter Island and show how this affects the collapse. Easter Island was covered with a subtropical forest of tall trees and woody bushes before human arrival. And through the technique of pollen analysis, which involves boring out a column of sediment deposited in a swamp or pond, the Swedish palynologist Olof Selin discovered pollen of an undefined species of palm tree that no longer exists. This palm was also discovered by analyzing of soil profiles. As you can see on the right picture, these root casts of the palm were preserved in the soil under the influence of fire and heat. These profiles have the cone-like root patterns of single palms, and it helps to determine the differentiation of individual palms, the determination of the spacing between palm trees, and the diameters of the root crowns. Soil profiles with a cumulative length of more than 6,000 meters scattered over the island show that about 70% of the island's surface was once covered by palm woodland. Thus, the palm trees dominated the ancient vegetation structure, both in terms of their large size and their high density. This photo on the left side demonstrates the prehistoric landscape, and the dark Holocene soil contains many root casts of now extinct Rapa Nui palm. And certainly there were other trees and shrubs in the woodland. However, this left no root casts in the soil, and the existence of a large number of other species is proved by the pollen findings and charcoal wood species identification. And next slide, please. Daria, can you change the slide? Oops. Okay, thank you. It was becoming a barren wasteland with each year after the day of human settlement, and the clearing of forests began after human arrival and was complete between the early 1400s and 1600s. The reason is the lack of rainfall, hot temperatures, and other environmental problems that characterized Easter Island, and it make it really susceptible to deforestation. Apart from it, apart from the specific environment, there is also an opinion that rats were the reason for deforestation, as Dasha already said, and humans were responsible for Rapa Nui's deforestation, as trees were being burned for firewood, for cremation and transportation. Furthermore, people cut down trees for growing crops and fishing. The opinion that humans were responsible for Rapa Nui's deforestation was demonstrated by Maeth and Borg in their article entitled Humans, Climate, or Introduced Rats. They claim that humans and not rats or climate variations destroyed Rapa Nui's palm woodland, because only less than 10% of the charred palm nuts carry teeth marks from rats, and the release of palm stumps in many places demonstrate that these trees were felled by man. And in conclusion, we can see several opinions on how deforestation occurred. However, I want to talk not about the reasons of deforestation, but about the consequences of it on agricultural sector. Next slide, please. And here, can I ask you to demonstrate the screen by myself, because I want to show.
Yes, of course.
Mm-hmm. So let me start with the consideration of crop production in the context of Easter Island. Actually, agriculture was very intensive. Easter's crop production was mostly focused on growing sweet potatoes, yams, taro, bananas, paper mulberry, and sojourns. About gardens, Maeth and Borg found garden soils that were integrated into the palm woodland. These garden soils are preserved between the undisrupted casts of the palm roots. Thus, early crop cultivation was obviously an integrated part of the palm woodland. Because the palms protected the gardens from drying, from harsh winds, runoff, and soil erosion by water and wind. And this is a picture from the article. I'm sorry for such bad quality, because this is a screen from the article. And here one can see cone of palm root molds here and here and this one. And this is a garden soil between them, and in this picture here. This picture shows the distribution of gardens and settlements within the Tenui area. Again, sorry for such quality. Triangles, if you can see. Sorry, where are they? Here. Triangles mean walled garden, and circles mean chicken coop. And here you can see the list of agricultural features that were found, such as household gardens adjacent to residential features, Manavai garden enclosures that are either subterranean or freestanding above ground features incorporating a stone chicken house, boulder gardens along surface lava flows, rock-covered lowland fields. Yet, after the trees were almost gone, there were problems such as soil erosion, drought, open spaces that allowed strong winds to prevent plant growth. So, since Easter Island also is a windy place and prone to droughts, people use lava rocks and stack large boulders to protect plants from the strong wind and drought. These techniques of usage of large boulders were the cornerstone of production, and extensive areas of ground were partly covered by rocks placed at close intervals on the surface or down to a depth of a foot. These rock gardens made the soil moisture and reduce evaporative water loss due to the sun and wind, because the ground beneath them was still damp, as they protected it from the sun. Also, rocks damp out the annual fluctuations in soil temperature by absorbing solar heat during the day and releasing it at night. They protect soil against being eroded by splashing rain droplets. Also, the Rapa Nui people of Easter Island made stone lean pits 5 to 8 feet in diameter and up to 4 feet deep that were used as composting pits in which to grow crops, and possibly also as vegetable fermentation pits. Stones also used for collecting water. There were a pair of stone dams built across the bed of the intermittent stream that helps to collect water. And I have a video for you just for 2 minutes. It's about Easter Island's ancient gardening practices.
Lithic mulching was not the only sustainable technique they developed to increase their productivity. The French botanist Jacques Barrault made a distinction between farmers and gardeners. A farmer grows a multitude of identical anonymous plants together in a field, but a gardener cherishes each plant individually. I like to think the Rapa Nui would fall into the second category. Another of their solutions to increase their food supply were little protected gardens they called manavai. A small low wall enclosing a circular space a few meters across protected a mix of crops, retaining moisture and providing shelter from the salt wind. There are thousands of these manavai, protected gardens, all over Rapa Nui, and they show that personal solution to the food supply. And there were other innovations in this landscape too. A hidden resource, unseen from the surface, are caverns formed by the collapsed roofs of the island's network of volcanic lava tubes. Sonia Hawa is a Rapa Nui archaeologist who has spent years surveying the island to document all its prehistoric sites. Without extensive tree cover, many of the crops that need shade to survive were grown in these caverns. So this has all been planted then?
It's all banana. It's a type of banana.
Yeah?
Yeah.
They seem to be growing very well down here. They're protected from the wind.
Yeah. They have a protection, but also the nutrition of the rocks. And they create like a how you say? Microclimate inside. And it's not only good for banana, but you can put taro, uhi, tea, sugarcane.
And how extensive are these caves?
You can have 3 or 4 kilometers of caves. And inside, there, of course, is divided for different reasons.
Okay, let's continue. This is an interesting graph which shows degree of land use. Sorry for such quality, but A, B, and C mean 3 different area studies. The red line identifies the year, AD 1722, the data of first European contact. Deforestation affected many aspects of life, including agricultural sectors that caused the collapse of society. And people lost raw materials, the source of fire, as they used tree for firewood, the source of food and wild-caught foods. Wood was also important for carving and construction. Since the trees grew fewer and fewer, the soil became infertile, and this in turn decreased crop yields. Moreover, the lack of trees led locally to soil erosion by rain and wind. Thanks to diamond, it can be proved by huge increases in the quantities of soil-derived metal ions carried into swamp sediment cores. If we are talking about fishing, poultry farming, and animal husbandry, deforestation also had negative impact on these spheres. Initially, geographic factors such as estuaries isolation, rugged coastline, steep drop-offs of the ocean bottom, and the lack of coral reef fish harmed fishing. Hence, there were only 127 species compared to more than 1,000 fish species on Fiji. It was measured thanks to the analysis of bones, and 6,000 of vertebrate bones were identified in the middens and proved that the largest animal available to Easter Islanders was a common dolphin. People had to catch it far offshore in big seaworthy canoes built from the tall trees because the common dolphin generally lives out to the sea. Mollusks and sea urchins were also in short supply. The shellfish were also eradicated. As far as fish bones are concerned, they were equal only to 23% of all bones, whereas it was the main food for other in Polynesia and was equal to 90% or more of all the bones. Nevertheless, the first settlers of Easter Island had more meat sources, such as porpoises, fish, shellfish, birds, rats, and even seals, sea turtles, and possibly large lizards. But after there was no wood to build sea-going canoes, people lost access to wild food, such as porpoises, tuna, and pelagic fish. It was proved by the decline of fish bones and fish hooks from middens by 1,500. Thus, according to Diamond, palm nuts, Malay apples, and all other wild fruits dropped out of the diet. And so Icelanders faced with starvation, population loss, cannibalism. We can prove the existence of cannibalism by the human bones, cracked for bone marrow extraction, which were found in piles of garbage. The lack of fish was compensated by the land birds and a large number of rats, which were delivered in the canoes of the Polynesian colonists and then become the main food resource. As for the land birds, chickens were the sole domestic animal. Easter Islanders built numerous stone chicken houses called haremoa here that had stone walls in comparison with the prehistoric houses, human houses. Yet, seabirds, land birds, and porpoises were the part of ecocide also, and after the extinction of all species, people had a big consumption of surgeon's juice. Thus, deforestation, overhunting, and predation by rats led people to strafe. They had nothing to eat, having exhausted all their supplies. But about the rats, I have found the information that Brown in 1924 reported that rats were even valued as a currency by the Polynesian inhabitants in the past. And this report indicates that rats were once not abundant but rare on the island, and that people looked upon the animals as valuable as a food source and not as a major environmental problem. So it's again unclear about the exact reasons of deforestation. And others said that rats were the main food source after chickens die out, because during archaeological excavations, rat bones were commonly found in direct proximity of settlements, often in cooking pits and rubbish pits. So, in conclusion, we see how deforestation can affect many other areas, which in turn cause the collapse of society. And I think that is all about my part, and Anna will continue.
Yes, and now let's talk about the linguistics. And so the term Vananga Rapa Nui, that translates to the Rapa Nui way of speaking, is the native language of the Easter Island population. And now let's watch the video 1, where we can hear more information about the language in the Rapa Nui translation.
Vananga Rapa Nui, Vananga nei I te kainga ko Rapa Nui. E te re o nei o roto I te hua aire o mā ohi.
Yeah, and now let's have a look at the video 2, where a woman says everyday phrases in Rapa Nui.
Yorana, pehea koe, e riva no a au. Au e na a, e a koe, rake, mauiui a au. Pehe tu uhua ai, paraua e riva no a. Pehe tu ngā matua era, e riva no a, kokoa atua o te ai paparu au, e mamaru au.
So, as we can see, the Rapa Nui language is quite funny and at the same time difficult, at least for me, but people are very interested in learning it. However, today, the Rapa Nui language is in the category threatened, mostly because of the small quantity of worldwide native speakers, which in 2016 were only about 1,000. Unfortunately, this number is gradually decreasing due to the domination of Spanish on the island, especially among children and teenagers. The next slide, please. Despite these facts, the Rapa Nui language was more in danger of extinction in the 20th centuries than now, owing to the 3 main reasons. First, as Daria has already said, the arrival of slave raiders and new diseases in the 18th, 19th centuries reduced the community from an estimated population of 4,000 to barely more than 100 survivors. As a result, it caused the loss of cultural and linguistic knowledge. Second, the annexation of the Polynesian island of Rapa Nui by the Chilean administration in 1888. It created the linguistic assimilation and led the community to the language shift towards Spanish, making it the official language. Since the spread of Spanish increased because of the Chilean government, it also became politically valuable as a language of litigation for the Rapa Nui. And the first one is the arrival of almost 400 new Chilean government workers with their families, and also the other part of the Spanish-speaking population. Also the return of a dozen Rapa Nui young people who had been taken as the first generation to study on the continent. And additionally, the opening of regular air passenger travel to the island and the interracial marriages in the mid-1960s contributed to the development of bilingualism between the locals and their further acculturation. The next slide, please. Consequently, Spanish was established as the language of the public domain and the main instrument of access to material and political resources, while Rapa Nui became devaluated and increasingly confined to the private domain, with big transformations due to loanwords from English and French. The next slide, please. The written language of Easter Island is based on preserved wooden tablets, which were discovered by one of the missionaries in 1864. He identified the engravings as a script. Its name is Ronga Ronga, which means in the Rapa Nui language to recite, to declaim, to chant out. As we can see from the picture in the bottom, Ronga Ronga images look like humans, animals, plants, artifacts, and geometric forms. If we look closer at the example of the Ronga Ronga in the right corner of the slide, we can note that every symbol that contains a head is oriented with the head either facing up, forward, or profiling to the right. Also, it is important to point out that the orientation of the writing is read from left to right, bottom to top. In more scientific words, this method is known as reverse boustrophedon. According to the oral tradition, the tools used to make the carvings were obsidian flakes or small shark teeth. Furthermore, oral history also suggests that only a small elite was ever literate to read the Ronga Ronga, since literacy was a privilege of the ruling families and priests, who were kidnapped or died soon afterwards in the resulting epidemics. Furthermore, it is believed that the tablets have been sacred. Nowadays, about 2,000 Ronga Ronga are known. They are stored in various museums and private collections around the world. In addition, the Ronga Ronga still remains a mysterious symbol from the past because there are no successful attempts to deciphering them. The next slide, please. Easter Island is extremely well known because of its unusual massive stone statues, moai, and monumental platforms, ahu, where the statues stand, as we can see from the picture. The Rapa Nui people manufactured more than 300 megalithic ahu and carved 887 moai from Ranaraku Taf, but a few statues elsewhere, the current count is 53, were carved from other types of volcanic stone occurring on the island. So the question is, why these monumental constructions were being constructed? What is or are their purposes? The next slide. First of all, one of the most important Rapa Nui rituals was the ones associated with death. A cosmological imperative in ancient Polynesia embraced social life as a series of transactions between people and deities. One of them is known as mana. It is a difficult and quite complex concept, but best understood as a generative potency assessed from deities and transformed through ritual transactions, manifest in success and efficiency, and become as a spiritual energy. In practice, it is a funeral ritual which consists of wrapping the bodies in vegetable fabric and exposing them to open air inside the ahu, this monumental platform, until their decomposition. When the bones were washed and deposited there, the spirit could reunite with its ancestors. So this process we can see in the picture on the slide. Here, Moai are viewed as representatives of this ancestor cult. When Rapa Nui was carrying ancestors out of stone at Ranararaku, the ancestors were being reconstituted in stone so that Ranararaku became a place where statues were burned. Ranararaku is one of the volcanoes on the island. After that, they were transported to the chiefdom's territories, where they were placed on one of the ahu. In this case, the Moai obtained their mana and could exercise their power in order to influence events for a long time. However, only chiefs and important members of clans could get access to the spiritual energy or mana if they wanted to ask for help from their ancestors.
Okay, next slide, please. And a couple of words about the Easter island Birdman. As I said before, the island of Rapa Nui is isolated and its fauna is quite poor. So the birds were the only creatures that were close to people. Therefore, it's not surprising that a religious cult was created around the birds. Sea birds, according to beliefs, were associated with the gods and united the three elements: water, earth, and air. It's not known exactly how the cult of Manutara and the competition of Birdmans arose. This belief is around Manutara, which can be translated as the bird of luck, and identified with the white-tailed tern. You can see it on the slide, the third picture. It is a migratory seabird that arrived on the island every spring to lay eggs. At present, it's no longer possible to see the tern because it has not returned to the island for many years. Around the beginning of the 18th century, the cult of ancestors, represented by Moai status, was abandoned due to the loss of prestige of the old political and religious order. Gradually, the old beliefs are replaced by new rituals associated with fertility and with the creator god Maki or Make. Initially, the celebration of the Birdman competition was religious in the honor of his god. And according to tradition, the creator god brought seabirds from Sala y Gomes to the island. There they nest in the spring and summer months. Later, due to the emergence of new clans led by warrior leaders, the ceremony became more political, becoming a system that allowed the warrior class to justify its power. Now the leaders will be selected among the winners of the annual competition, and not for hereditary or belligerent reasons, which was fairer for all parties.
The next slide, please. In the 1860s, Catholic missionaries had settled on Easter Island and began a process of turning the domestic population to Christianity, which was completed by the late 19th century. Moreover, the introduction of Christianity led to the great destruction of the script, since natives were to burn the tablets in order to reach this respect from missionaries. Although the Rapa Nui managed to save some of them, most of them became merely different fragments of the original Ronga-Ronga. In the issue, most of the parts of the local religion, including rituals and traditions and significant writing records, as Ronga-Ronga, were suppressed by Christianity and almost forgotten for a long time. The next slide, please. After all of these studies that we have made, we can conclude that it is difficult to concentrate on one of the many reasons that led to the collapse of the Easter Island civilization. Most likely, there is a complex of reasons that led precisely to such a result. Thank you for your attention. We are ready to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. It was actually excellent. I learned quite a bit. I thought it was well researched. So let's open it up to the floor for some questions from the audience. Let's get the screen open here.
I think we have a question from Asya, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, why am I not seeing it? Yeah, Asya, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that my colleagues, some of them remember lectures with Evgeny Grishin on history. And so we learned that when colonists came to one of the islands, the main reason to conquest them and teach is that is the difference in religion. So they said that they misunderstood the God and so on. And they highlighted their relationship in couples. So they said that, for instance, wives and husbands sometimes can change their partners. So my question is, I think that in Eastern Island, the difference in religions, and you also highlighted that they were cannibals, is also important to was also important to the people who conquested the civilization. So my question is, what about the marriage? Was it important, and how it was functioning?
Jay, you muted.
So maybe my question is too difficult.
We don't hear you.
Then I would ask just about was the religion a good point to justify the conquest?
So maybe my colleagues will correct me, and so in the case of religion, it also was a really strong case to go to the Easter Island, because they, moreover, they had not only this ancestors cult, as you just learned, also this cult of Birdman, and then I wouldn't say that there was a lot of religious cases. Also, now all locals of Eastern Island, they are all Christians. So there was more like a economical question. In a case of that, as I mentioned in the demography part, the most of the Eastern Island was bought by French soldier, so it was used like some fields to make some profit. And for me, I didn't hear any sources that mentioned about something like about marriages and some points of Christianity. So because when Europeans came, they already collapsed, and there was like a degradation of local culture. So I don't think that it was a big problem or big issues for them. So maybe someone change the slide for demography list. No, okay. There was like a small amount of people, and then this small amount of people decreased because of diseases, and so there was not a lot of people to convert in Christianity. So again, I don't think that it was a big reason, a big case for Rapa Nui.
Good. Any other questions? Okay, I've got a couple. For Daria, it does seem like you're kind of looking at two collapses, really. Do you think that's the case here?
Two collapses? Yes, or even more better to say like one collapse with the two stages, one because of probably Rapa Nui themselves, and Europeans end up with this process of degradation, and degradation in the sense of culture and in the sense of ecology, agriculture, and also in the sense of population. So we can say that there was two collapses, but I think that it's better to say that there was one collapse with the two stages, like because
No, go ahead.
What again?
Oh, it just seems that there's two very different sets of circumstances. One is the introduction of new diseases, slavery, cultural destruction, and disrespecting the native culture, and the other was something that happened internally. So it seems like, but they're both dramatic, but there's different variables. But maybe it's just like you said. Maybe in some ways it's a continuation, and that you just threw in these super stressors with the European contact and colonialism.
So I would say that before European contact, it seems like there was not a lot of trees or almost no trees in the island. So maybe I think that if there was no Europeans, they will continue collapse, but maybe a little bit slower. They will live a little bit longer, but at the end, it's not like Europeans just make the process faster. And that's it.
Yeah, may I also clarify?
Yeah.
There was a question in the syllabus, like why we can consider that the civilization is collapsed just by points, because I can't identify them separately right now.
What was the last part, Asya? You can identify.
Yeah, I said that I have a whole picture, but I cannot separate each reason point by point. So I'm asking just to like briefly name them again.
Okay, we can say, at least I can say at least 2 points why we can consider the Rapa Nui civilization as collapsed civilization. So one of my favorite demographic case. In demographic case, at the end of 1874, there were like less people than they came when the amount of people that came to the islands, in the beginning. So it's like a decreasing of people. Like population was too small, and they couldn't even feed themselves. Also, in the case of culture, they lost their culture. We can say that because, for example, in the case of Ronga, the writing system that they lost, and because of diseases, because of degradation of population, now we don't have people that can translate it. So a lot of part of cultural legacy is untranslatable. Also, continue the cultural topic. The religion now is really different. So we got this ancestor cult. We got a Birdman, and now they are not followed. We have only Christianity. And so I think, yes, that's it. And also in the case of social structure, they got now really different social structure. Also, they lose their they're not a separate island. They like part of Chile now. And I would say that I don't see any I don't see any feature that could prove that Easter Island isn't collapsed. So in every stages, in every tendencies, they lost something, and so I think that's it.
Yeah, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it does seem like when you talk about collapse and you talk about it having all sorts of different dimensions, the people of Easter Island really got screwed bad. I mean, they collapsed in every way. So yeah, it's sort of a great example of the ultimate level of collapse. With the final ending taken away for slavery. On the geology, the caves that are there have a particular geological formation process. They sound in description a little bit like what Memo was talking about when he was talking about the cenotes and the caves in the Yucatan, but they seem to be very different formation processes. Can you comment on maybe the difference between what we had in the Yucatan and the formation of the geology on Easter Island?
May I ask Elizaveta ask these questions, because I'm not sure. It's not my part.
No. This would be for Elizaveta.
Yeah.
Can you clarify the question?
Yeah. In the movie clip that you showed, and it talks about these caves and that cover the island, that are all over the island. Can you tell us a little bit about how those caves came about? Do you know what the geological creation of those caves were?
Yeah, as I understand, they made plants moisture, and they help to cope with drought.
Okay, like the ones. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just said that they help to cope with drought and wind.
Right. No, I see how the people used them, and now I understand, because I think when I read your paper, I had a little trouble understanding how they were used for maintaining the soil content of the moisture content in the soil. Now I understand it. But do you know the formation, what the geological foundation of the island and tunnels in there?
It was bad connection. Sorry, can you repeat?
Yeah, just in the geology, what about the island made it have all these different caves and tunnels?
I don't know. I don't know what should I say about geology.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Is the island based from a volcano then?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, but it never formed a coral reef. So sometimes in the Pacific, a lot of the islands are formed by volcanoes, and then the cone of the volcano can actually make like a circular island called an atoll, and then coral will build up around it. But you don't have coral around this island. You don't have a coral reef like you would normally have with one of these old volcanic islands. Here you still have, look like large volcanic peaks on the island. And
right,
okay. So. And so that the tunnels were formed by lava flows then?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so those would be called lava tubes, and that happens when lava flows out of a volcano, when it oozes out into a big flow, and the lava on the top hardens, but lava underneath is still flowing, and it flows out and leaves a tunnel underneath. So that sounds like what we're looking at then. And then sometimes those would collapse and leave those openings in them.
Yeah, I see.
Okay. All right, I just wanted to make sure that that's right. But the volcanoes on Easter Island aren't active, are they?
Yeah, they're not active.
Not active, okay. Let's see. The quote from Jared Diamond that you use there about cutting down the last tree. I mean, what do you think about that quote?
You mean the quote of one of his students, yeah? Yes, yeah. Yes, I see. It's interesting quote because I don't think that it's something about Easter Island. It's something about our ecological problem now, and it's not like a make thing that what do we thinking about when we continue to cutting down a lot of trees, forests, and pollute our environment. So in this case, is this quote is like a representation and show its representation of way how we can learn something through this Easter Island collapse, because this collapse is extremely interesting because isolated society in the middle of nowhere, and then they they create civilization by themselves and started to collapse by themselves, with the help of from Europeans. And so it makes think us about our present ecological circumstances. But when in the case of Easter Island collapse itself, so this quote is the reason why I think that the Pacific reds have the place in the collapse, because it's difficult to imagine the society that's cutting the last tree and do not realize that they are doing. At least I hope so. So it's create a sense for the second theory of ecological crisis.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And when that question is being asked, of course, it's meant to make us reflect. Do you even realize you're cutting down the last tree? Do you hit a certain point where maybe it's not the last tree, but you've upset the cycle so much that there's no going back, that you can't stop it to the point where the last tree will be cut down? You know, I just saw an article yesterday that the president of Brazil acknowledged that he's lost control of the burning in Brazil now, and that he can't stop the Amazon from burning down. And he's trying to ask now for international help, which he turned down previously. Do we enter into these spirals, and by the time we decide maybe we should react, it's too late? There's not enough trees left to keep the population going, or that they're entered into this cycle where people are making money at it and they're not going to stop until it's too late? You know, that's I think gets down to the point of this class in a lot of ways, is are we at that point in the modern world where we're cutting down the last tree and we may not realize it for another 50 years that, oh, back in 2020, we cut down the last tree and you know, there was no going back now. So that we have to stop and reflect on that, and that, yeah, on Easter Island at some point, you know, just before the population would have gone down, people were realizing, I think, that they were heading for some trouble. I imagine they did recognize that, but they couldn't stop themselves. This is something I think open up to everybody. I mean, what are your thoughts on this? How do you feel? Do you feel like you're in a society cutting down the last tree right now?
I think in some case, because you know, in Russia, I just wrote an article, the similar article, like a Brazilian, but about Russia, that they didn't count. They lost somehow, like in a sense of in a paper, like they didn't count it. Like 1 billion, I think, of hectare of forests. Like they, you know, like they don't know where is it, where it. Yeah, it's you know, sounds ridiculous and terrible at the same time.
Yeah, I also would like to add. So I think as Daria, that now we have a kind of similar situation with Easter Island, because when first Rapa Nui came on the island, there were a lot of trees and quite like rich forest, but during the time like there left nothing. And here, especially in Russia, we also quite face the same situation, because we have a lot of trees, but we just don't value these like things, and therefore we also lose a lot of them, and mostly because of like stupid reasons.
And also this coronavirus situation a little bit remind this smallpox and tuberculosis in Rapa Nui. So it's like, so this case of Rapa Nui collapse, you know, makes think about.
Yeah, a consequence of globalization, right? Which European contact there was, and just like the spread of this virus. Some of the ecological things going on in Siberia now, aren't there fires burning in some of the permafrost, smoldering peat fires? And then didn't that also lead to one of the thawing of the permafrost, lead to one of the largest oil spills now ever in the history of humanity in Siberia? So incredible devastation going on. Yeah, Daria?
No, nothing. I just agree.
Okay. Artem, did you have a comment?
Yes, like it seems like they could have just readjusted to another mode of production or whatever, because, well, trees are not that essential if you don't depend on them. And then it's just an argument about adaptation on something. So.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this last week in class, and about the humanity has been kind of evolved to take our resources and kind of live immediately, even though we can anticipate to the future. We don't do it very often, or we do it only, on an annual basis to help our survival. And that if we're going to continue as a species and survive, we have to completely rearrange how we think about the world into something being sustainable. That it's not, what can I get for myself to make my life good right now, but what can I do to create a world that is a sustainable system that can go on, for the foreseeable future in a balanced way. And we just don't think that way. And it's a complete change of the way humanity's acted. Capitalism doesn't think that way. Humans in general do not think that way. We want what we want, and we tend not to think beyond, well, what have I got in the freezer to eat tomorrow? Or maybe thinking as far as your retirement, but we don't tend to think of the world as something that we have to maintain. Even a lot of the religions, some of the religions are predicated on the world ending, right? And then you can transfer up into some sort of higher plane. So there's no investment in the maintenance of the world if you take that philosophy to that extreme, which humanity has done. One more little question for Dennis on the Birdman cult. I mean, it doesn't seem that when the original colonists landed at Easter Island, that they had a Birdman cult. Maybe there was no need for it because there was no competition for leadership because it was only a few hundred people. Do we have any idea when they began this Birdman religion, ideology, or competition?
Can you repeat the beginning of your question, please?
Yeah, just when did they introduce the religion around the Birdman cult? Because it wasn't there when they got there, was it? It was just a few hundred people. But it became this competition between the different clans, right, for who was going to be the king or the ruler, the chief. If I understand it correctly, correct me if I don't.
Yeah. There are some leaders of some clans. It was their leaders, and they start this competition based on this code. But frankly speaking, all information that I found that it was this moment when, at the beginning of the 18th century, when this cult of ancestors of this my cult just was abandoned. And they start the new one based on their, these beliefs in the God make, I don't know how to say it right, was from the beginning of this civilization. But this competition based on cult just started, then the previous cult was finished. And I didn't find real useful information how we just start to do it. I really tried to find it, but for that moment, I don't really know about it. Maybe I didn't check all sources, but I really tried to understand this. It was just this moment in the time when we did it.
I know it seems to be associated with the decline. Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I, read something about this in some of encyclopedia, but I also didn't find, like origin sources or some archaeologist work. But as I get, it was, in a period of time when they already have, some when collapse started. So it's like a decrease in the population. It's in a time of problem of ecology, and so maybe because of this factor, they was disappointed in a cult of ancestors, And as I get, there was like the warriors get like the top of hierarchy in this society. So the Birdman was their cult, and so they got to the top and started to make the Birdman as a main religion. But it's something I don't say for sure, and it's some kind of from one of the from one of the book I can pronounce.
Yeah, I said this stuff when I presented, but yeah, the origin of this is not really understandable for all of us.
Okay, no, yeah, I've never known, but I just have this general impression. I just didn't know if there was anything more. Does it seem in some ways like it's some sort of ideological and political adaptation, maybe to try and end some conflict that was going on in the island, to try and create a unifying principle?
It reminds a little bit those moments in a history, like even in European history, when you have some crisis and then you got some militarization and soldiers that promise society to better better condition, like for example in Italy, in Germany, and in France also, and a lot of other countries. So it's kind of similar when there is a crisis, more militarization and radical movements, they are more like to be in a rise.
I also want to add, so as I have read in some sources, when Rapa Nui had this ancestor cult that was represented in Moai and Ahu and so on, and when the population faced environmental issues, there were a civil war between tribes, and one of these Rapa Nui people proclaimed that now I am one of the chiefs, and they started because of this self-destruction, because of these environmental and issues, because of civil war. Rapa Nui people just started toppling these Moai statues, and this man that proclaimed himself as one of the leaders, he established this Birdman cult, as I understood.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. So if the Moai were representative of the ancestors, and you want to change the legitimacy of authority, if your authority was coming from your ancestors, by toppling the ancestors, it kind of cut that and then allowed them to establish a new line of authority. Is that right?
Yes, because Rapa Nui people blamed their ancestors in these problems that they faced. But to be honest, it was more like self-destruction, and they just didn't know what to do. And one of these guys just, okay, let's switch to the different cult, and maybe something good would happen.
Yeah, makes sense. From what you presented, it is starting to make kind of a coherent picture of what was going on ideologically and politically, along with all the bad things of the demography and the population collapse and the environmental collapse. Let me cut it off here, and let's take a break and come back in about 15 minutes. That's at 7:20. And I made a mistake before. I said we were having the Khmers. We're not having the Khmer, sorry about that. We're having the Zhou. I have Khmer on my mind. So the Zhou will be presenting at 7:20. And take a break, and I'll see you back here in 15 minutes. I'll leave the room open so you can leave it on. Okay, I think everyone's back. And now we will move on to our next catastrophe of history, and we'll look at the decline of the Zhou Dynasty. And are you guys ready?
I don't know. Nikita should start.
Nikita's going to start? Okay, hold on, let me pull up my notes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we have Nikita, Sia, Gregory, and Sophia, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, turn it over to you.
Yeah, do you see my screen? Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, hello everyone, do you hear me well?
Yes.
So this is Zhou Dynasty group, and without further interruption, let us introduce yourself to the Zhou Dynasty. So the Zhou Dynasty is one of the quite peculiar Chinese empires which was existing before current millennium, and it actually was occupying one of the fifth or 1/6 part of the contemporary China. Here you may see the map of the Western Zhou dynasty, where it was located. It was located in the Eastern Asia, east of contemporary China. It is the main states of the Zhou dynasty. It is restricted with the Yellow Sea on the right, with the mountains on the top of it. Yeah. So, and here it ends. So basically here you may see all of the main administrative centers of Zhou dynasty. And may you have noticed that they are located around the Yangtze River and Yellow River basins. And this plays a peculiar role in the formation of Zhou states, since this climate produces drought sometimes. So they were striving to accommodate themselves with water. Also, here is the emphasized area, and this is where the Zhou royal court was located. So basically, that was the location of Zhou elite, of the people who were representing Zhou culture. It is located in Wei River Valley. It was restricted with the Qinlin Mountains on the south, and on the north, after the Jin River Valley, there are steppes, Ordos steppe, and Loess Plateau. So they're basically neighboring with the nomads who were located northward from this side. So yeah, this is also very important because the heartland of Zhou state was neighboring with the nomadic tribes, which we will develop afterwards.
Yeah, and scholars divide Zhou dynasty into 3 periods. But what is very interesting about China is that dynasties just go one after another. And if you look at the Wikipedia, you will see the long list of dynasties which changed each other. So Zhou dynasty was built instead of Shang dynasty, which they conquered in 1046 BC. And first of all appeared Western Zhou. That is named according to the capital, which was located at the west. But in 771 BC, capital was moved to the east, and that is Eastern Zhou period begins. It was divided also into 2 periods, so spring and autumn period, which is beautifully named by seasons. And then Warring States period, which is very important when we discuss collapse, because all the changes came to the climax at this point. And what is also needed to say that this dynasty was the longest Chinese dynasty. So you see by the dates. But how they conquered Shang dynasty and formed their own, that was made by the Mandate of Heaven, which Sonia will discuss right now.
Talking about an ethno-linguistic summary, it is important to mention the concept of hybridity. It is the combination of several distinct traditions and creation of new culture that is rooted in the original cultures, but that is at the same time differentiated from them. For example, it is such ethnic group as Chu, Xin, and Zhongshan. This ethnic group is the result of fusion of different Zhou groups. At the same time, there were separate culture for each of the different states. For instance, Jin, Ci, Xin, and Sichuan, and so on. The tendency to build a united culture for the whole Zhou state without the destruction of local culture for imposing new ones can be seen from the beginning of the governance of the Zhou dynasty. Analysis of language that was used by Zhou shows that it was almost the same language with the Shang dynasty that ruled before Zhou. And the inscription of bronze vessels that you can see in the picture and early literature illustrates that the syntaxes and lexicon are mostly identical. So Zhou dynasty based their culture on the Shang dynasty traditions, and the writing on the vessel also was taken from Shang. The next slide, please. Now I will talk about the king's power. There were several ways of enhancing the power of the king in the Western period. For example, the Mandate of Heaven, royal hospitality, and the fusion religious practice with administrative practice. And one of the important reasons why the Zhou dynasty was able to replace Shang dynasty is the ideological justification of their legitimacy, called the Mandate of Heaven. And initially, this mandate gives a right to rule only if the dynasty has moral superiority over the previous one, and thus new rule can return good governance to the people. And from the beginning, this ideology implies that the Zhou dynasty can lose their power. Then royal hospitality is a term that describes different strategies of ensuring power and control over the territory of Zhou. The first two strategies are arranging state receptions at the residences of regional lords and at the wasteland. A king becomes a host of this place, and so he confirms his power under the whole territory. Another strategy is when meetings take place at the king residences, and it provides stability and it holds the polity together because local lords admit the power of kings. The next slide, please. And during the spring and autumn period, and then the war period, Warring States period, royal hospitality as a strategy of maintaining the king's power had a lower impact than it supposed. The analysis of bronze inscription that indicate location of the king shows that the number of meetings with regional lords in non-main residences decrease over time. In the early Zhou period, which is on the picture, like in the early Zhou period, it happens in 54% of the total number of meetings, which are higher than in the later period when it was 24%. While meeting in one of the capitals that is called Zhou, you also can see in the picture, increased from 5% to 48%. And it leads to the expansion of independence of regional lords, and then has resulted in the civil war that occurred in the period of warring state. And another strategy, it was in the last slide, but also it is about king's power. Another strategy of enduring king's power is the amplification of the king's the amplification of the king's power during the Western Zhou period is related to the location of royal meeting in temples, which lead to a fusion of religious and administrative practice, since the authority of the king was based on the ancestral virtue that was religiously respected. So, yeah.
And now I would like to introduce to you socio-political structure as the very beginning of society's functioning. So Zhou Dynasty, as we saw, conquired in a very wise way, pretending that they have like mandate from gods, ancient gods. And they conquired Shang Dynasty, which was pretty big. So this small Zhou state now increased in its territory, and that is why central governing was not very effective right now. And they introduced a system of fiefdoms. So they had 75 fiefdoms. And that was a system of government based on landowners and tenants. So there was the king with mandate of power, lords, their soldiers, and also peasants or farmers which were working on the territory of their lords. And many people consider that was a feudalism. Although some of the scholars criticize this idea and say that according to the different traditions, locations, and the ways the king gave power to lords, it is not very similar to what happened in Europe. However, I think that this concept is makes us to picture how the system was functioning in a good way. So blood relationship was very important, and from 75 fiefdoms, 50 were ruled by the relatives of the king, and that is the evidence is that 50 lords had the same surname as the king. Also, the power was leading on a heredity basis, and talent was not important, but as I stated before, blood. There was a clear distinction between wealthy and poor, and that is proved by archaeologists who found more than 1,000 tombs, and only a few of them contained precious items. And also demography is important. At the very beginning, city contained from 100s to 1,000s of families. Next slide, please, Nikita. Despite the fact that there was a strong fragmentation of society according to classes and also according to their conditions, like wealthy or poor, because it is also important that from the very beginning, during Western Zhou, gifts and various resources were also given by nobles, and there was a little chance to like earn something. Despite this fact, there was also a strong integration of society, and that was introduced by the concept of hybridity that Sonia already mentioned, and that was as vertical, both vertical and horizontal. Vertical was about different layers of society, and that was changed by culture. So both people from elite and people from low classes had the same music. And this, Zhou people believe that culture and music can like integrate society. And also there was horizontal integration, and that was made by politics. So as Sonia already mentioned, there were different identities, but one main politics, the same in all the fiefdoms, and also a king who was traveling from one state to another made these different identities to integrate into one culture, into one polity. And also concept of royal hospitality was important, as I mentioned. And you see here the picture. It is depicted on ceramics during warring periods, and after each meeting, they had some like I don't know how to call it. They just depicted what was going on these meetings. Next slide. And just to show you the dynamic, you saw what happened at the beginning, at the Western Zhou period. It is on the left side of the slide. And at the Eastern Zhou period made a huge transformations in this structure. And so during warring states period, the system of fiefdoms contained only 7 fiefdoms. And we remember that there were 75 at the very beginning. Why that happened? So, because right now talent was important. And so blood relationships did not matter. That is why lords were not connected to the king, and consequently, they didn't depend on him. They introduced their selfish interests, and wars started between them because they wanted to expand their territory, and they were caring only about that. So now king became dependent on the lords because they also didn't want to give resources to the king, who was whose residence was located and at the not very fruitful territory. And as I stated, talent became important, and consequently social mobility became possible. That can be justified by proved by the amount of canals, increase of trade, and so on. But most important is the analysis of elite culture, which shows us that right now culture of poor people from low classes and elite was mixed, not as at the very beginning, like with music, but religious things like art, ceramics, and so on now existed for 2 classes equally. And the last thing is demography. Now cities reaches from 2000s can reach 2000s of families, and that was also not very not very good, because the land was not very fruitful as I said at the very beginning. So the competition increased, and also this competition increased after nomadic people from the surrounding states started to conquer Zhou, and some people were even staying at the territory of Eastern Zhou. Next slide, please.
Right. So thank you, Aisa. But you mentioned a couple of times the fruitful land, and yeah, that's actually was a problem to Western Zhou, to Western Zhou too, because the whole migration, because the factor of migration, which I showed on the map, was from the east to from the west to the east, from the yellow dry land to the closer to sea, along to rivers and so on. So yeah, in the map you may see the vector of migration from 1040 to 200 BC, and it was this migration was done in few steps, so to say. So there were milestones in between, and these migrations, they were matching with the dynasties, right? So the point is that people in the Zhou dynasty, they were trying to find a better climate for their agricultural economics, but they always were suffering from aridity climate, right? Next slide, please. So yeah, they were suffering from aridity, and then eventually drought struck. But how do we know exactly that it was drought? Well, for example, one of the pieces of evidence is the archaeology, because when scientists, scholars, analyzed the grain samples, they saw the decreased intensity of biopathogenesis. So it means that the fossil, that the soil that was generating along with history, the role of the bioorganisms in that, like the remains of agricultural plants or animals, so it decreased. So and it is normally associated with the drought, right? And the second point, which follows from the previous, is the decreased magnetic susceptibility of samples matching with the hypothesis, right? So the biopathogenesis leads to the increased part of the ferrum in the soil. So ferrum is like magnets, right? And the decreased magnetic susceptibility is associated with the drought too. And also the grain size is actually interesting. Previous slide, please. Yep, thank you. So as you can see, the northern part of this map, like the beginning of the migration, is yellow. So it is logical that their dry nature, dry climate, and in such types of climate, the grain size actually they naturally smaller than in more mild climates. So yeah, but in the historical layer matching with the Zhou dynasty, like with the decline of Zhou dynasty, researchers found out that there are smaller grains actually are found. So, and like it leads us to the conclusion that wind at that times was blowing from north to south, just as the migrations. So yeah, and these dry winds, they were not good for the agricultural economics of Zhou Dynasty too. Okay, next slide. Thank you. And cultural remains support the migration vector. So excavation on sites found out the cultural remains like clay or pottery that were matching with the hypothesis too. For example, in the latter period, the so-called gray pottery, like pottery which was in gray tones, more popular, and it was found mostly on the southern part of the map, right? And next slide. Another piece of evidence that supports the drought hypothesis is the literature, because, for example, in the poem Yu Wu Zheng, from the book of poetry, it is directly said that the Zhou capital was already destroyed and there was no place to rest or reside. So even though the poem itself or the book of poetry were written at about 300 years later after the alleged drought, it still may hint us to the conclusion of the drought hypothesis, despite the fact that the literature is such a thing that it can be interpreted in many ways, right? And that is like open to discussion. But yeah, so this is what they said. Thank you, Nikita. Tell us what we're after.
So yeah, and another factor behind Zhou's collapse is the warfare with nomadic or semi-nomadic societies called Xinyan. And there are two implications of this warfare. The first one is the military defeat, which was an eventual result of this warfare. And the second is how the warfare and action is actually described in Zhou's historical narratives, which may present some evidence for undermining Zhou's authority according to mandate of heaven. So here on the map, you can see the Jin River Valley. This is the main site where military actions were happening most of the time. So this is at the right bottom corner. It is the western capital of Zhou, which is called Fenhao, and on the upper left is basically approaches to plateaus and Ordos steppes, where nomadic tribes are believed to be located. And here is the Jin River Valley. And the thing is that the geographical location is already not in the favor of the Zhou, because it is basically a direct line for Xianun troops to get to Fenhao, and it is guessed from up to bottom. So Xianun are presented with hate and military advantages. Also, there are several facts. The first is that in the region of Jin region, there weren't a lot of royal tombs, even during the mid-Western Zhou period. So probably it means that there weren't much of the administrative control, and some of the cities were captured in conjections. So like where they couldn't cooperate properly. Also, the historical narrative which describes this warfare starts basically with reign of King Wu, who actually the one who starts the warfare. He attacks the settlements of the of some Xianun people near the Jin region, and it is presented in the Bamboo Annals, which are basically the poetic chronicles, which depict the reign of different rulers. And it is presented as a speech between one of the dukes and the King Wu. And it is basically like juxtaposing between demonstration of real military power and virtuous politics. So King Wu is depicted as a reckless politician who tries to demonstrate his power, and that resolves conflict. So his becomes like the cause of the consequent warfare. And this consequent warfare was not of quite positive character for local demography, because it was already mentioned of the problems with land, with agricultural land resources, and the Xianun were constantly pressuring from the northwest, making the people retreat and creating more dense population. So yeah, also one of the bronze vase inscriptions, which is called Du Yudin, describes the military campaign, and it suggests that the Feng Hao sent around 7,000 troops toward to counterattack Xianun people, and they had to do that in the 3 or 4 days. So it like Zhou troops should have get there quite quickly. So and eventually warfare led to the Zhou's collapse of their capital, which made them migrate to east and found new capital called Quanzhou or Luoyang, which manifests Eastern Zhou period. So, and there are not much, there are no bronze inscriptions and bamboo annals speaking about the defeat of Feng Hao, because it is quite disgraceful for them, and bamboo annals and bronze inscriptions are usually used to dignify the Zhou monarchy.
So just to conclude, we will name all the causes again. And as we already discussed during our course and read in the text, there are many causes, and there never is one reason why the society collapsed. As we stated before, the Zhou Dynasty came to the collapse during the Warring States period, and there was a combination of various factors. So here in our slide, we talk mostly about the talent which was recognized, and afterward, lords became not dependent on the king, and they even had war among themselves. The second thing is mandate of heaven. So when there are some droughts or wars and dynasty is not very successful, it means that king loses the power given by gods. And consequently, it means that he loses power and belief from its population, and surely from lords. So as I stated before, lords follow their selfish interests, Also, we talk about military defeat, and it is important that during these wars, each, as I stated, each lord has its own army, and they started to try to conquer even king. And surely droughts, which are influencing not just king's authority, but also the conditions the society lives in. And we as modern people we would say that when we have social mobility and when we have the things that talent is important, not blood relationship, it is very good. But however, in Zhou Dynasty, the king and population were not able to recognize and anticipate the coming problem. And thus, in 226 BC, Queen State's army kills the last ruler of Zhou Dynasty and absorbs the conquered state, which had not much power already. That's it. And I think that, initially we were thinking about 20 minutes presentation, but anyway, we are happy to answer your questions and maybe elaborate more. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. Another excellent presentation. You guys are all doing a wonderful job, I gotta say. So let me open it up to questions from the students, or if there's anyone out there watching on YouTube, you can send questions in and we can address those. I don't see any hands up yet. So, well, let me start with a couple of questions that I had. And maybe this is for Nikita, but for the military, is it a professional army, do you think, or are the troops recruited from the peasants and the regular citizens to drafted into the army or conscripted into the army, or both, that there's a professional class of military, but then for war that they would then conscript more people into the military?
So you're asking about Zhou's military or military of Xianwu?
Zhou.
So as far as I know, that was both Zhou, native state warriors, but also the recruited warriors of other states, for instance, Qin's state, which were helping to defend this side.
But do you think the warriors, even the ones recruited from other states, that they were professional warriors, or that they were citizen warriors?
As far as I know, they were professional warriors.
Okay, so it was probably a socioeconomic class, a status that you had of being a warrior. Certainly, you get that impression when you look at the Qin Dynasty tombs, like the terracotta soldiers, where they all clearly look like professional soldiers. That's their job. So that's later, but you think that was probably the tradition also already with the Zhou?
That was another question.
Same question, just kind of mulling it over a little bit more. Just confirming that that's what you seem to think, that they were professional warriors, which makes sense to me.
Could you please repeat the question, because you...
Sorry. Just that they seem to maintain a standing army of people whose job is to be a soldier.
Yeah, I guess that's the point, because it is more about social structure. But from my side, I can only suggest that defending this site was extremely important, because it is a constant threat, and it is the Zhou royal elite, which was located really close to some threat.
Yeah, I would add, so we didn't discuss that right now, because we were trying to discuss more collapse. But what is also interesting about Zhou civilization is the fact that there were some specialized cities. so they were like job people. I don't remember what was the name. I can find it, but it was even the city even was named by these job people. And also there was a city with warriors, and they were called wrong. I think that some people can know that. Even my uncle's dog named Wrong. So they were professional, very strong warriors, and they were used, as far as I know, just to defend the territory of Zhou.
Oh, okay, very interesting.
May I say something?
Of course.
Yeah, sure. So Isa said an important point about the specialized cities. Yeah, and that is why actually we cannot fully rely on the sites in terms of archaeological argument for drought, because some of the sites may be just in the wrong place. I mean that like some cities were specialized on these warrior things, like fortified cities, and some of them were not. So I didn't notice in these papers about the archaeology of drought any mentions of that, So yeah, maybe this is might be a methodological, like just a warning to, like, for readers, for scholars, to make sure that they are citing the right city, that it is possible, and like it is possible to find their biopedagogenetic layer, so to say, in order to confirm their hypothesis. Do you see my point? I hope everyone saw it. Right?
Are you saying that the historical naming of cities doesn't necessarily match up with the archaeology?
The other ways around, maybe, because look, so the archaeologists said that, okay, we excavated so different samples, and we didn't notice like much of biopedagogenesis hints. Therefore, in this period, in this particular place, there was no agricultural activity. Therefore, the drought is possible. But it may be just the wrong place, because the city itself may be not specialized on the agriculture. That's why it is like distributed to a lesser extent than in an agricultural or a regular city. So just a warning to everybody, right?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, usually, even though a city that was dedicated to warriors would probably still do some level of agriculture as well.
Yes, but to a lesser extent still than an agricultural city. Like this is the comparison point. Like it's all relative, right?
The science is a bit complicated that you're talking about with the biopedagogenesis, the grain size, and the magnetic susceptibility. Can you explain it just a little bit more and clarify it a little bit more? I mean, pedogenesis is these soil formation processes. So what is different in the soil if there's agriculture versus not agriculture?
Okay, so as I understood it, when the biopedagogenesis is like predominating, the soil is more likely to show higher magnetic susceptibility because of the because of the, what is it?
Iron.
yeah, thank you. Because of
Ferrets,
the so yeah, and one of the possible like profiles to look at the soil samples is to check its magnetic susceptibility. And this is like the numbers that I wanted to put here, and it is the soil from the drought period were almost twice less magnetic than from the, so to say, normal period or normal soil, right? And also scholars, they were looking at things like color and texture of the soil, but this is to a bigger extent, to a bigger samples, because the ferromagnetic samples, they were no more than 100 grams or something like this.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. And again, it seems like it's very a good scientific method, but it's also subject to some misinterpretation. That there could be variables that they're not taking into account, like you already mentioned about the activities at the city.
Yeah, that's why it's an interesting argument, because like the another part that builds it up. Nikita, can you please switch to the slide with the map about aridity? Yeah, thank you. So another point in this argument is the climate, because so what scholars did is that they simply measured the average rain level.
Yeah, rainfall, yeah.
Yeah, rainfall in these regions, like from the starting point of the hypothetical migration and where they finished. And they measured the rainfall, and it like what was obviously for now, looking on this beautiful colored map, that the starting point was again almost twice as drier than the finishing point. And so these dynamics can be seen even now. So the point of this is that the point of me saying this climatic thing is that these parts of the argument, they are not working separately. They're working only all together. So it seems like when this correlation seen on different spheres, so yeah, it told them something and tells us to, right?
So the migration we're showing from 1400 to 256 BC, I mean, that's over 1,000 years period of migration. So it's not a, let's just get up and move one day, but it's a more gradual shift of just continuing to pressure in one direction. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, because so I know what analogy I would like to make, but well, evolution is not a big thing. So time is required in order to like these compatible genes to build into the genofund. So in order to less compatible genes to die out and more compatible to like dominate, right? So yeah, and what I think is these migration, they were partially conscious because, well, it is a long period, like even historically long period. Therefore, yeah, people maybe not fully understood what they were doing, but yeah, maybe I'm reading too deep into this.
Were there changes in agricultural technology? Anything significant going on during this period as well? Because maybe it was just, maybe it was a pure sort of capitalist thing. It was just easier to make a surplus, make more grain, make more food, and you follow the lands that are better for it.
Well, okay, your question consists of two parts.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, they were following a better conditions for making surplus because they wanted a stable economy, and in arid places it's like not so easy to maintain. But as for the technologies, I actually don't know. I didn't saw any hints of that. Like glancing through articles, maybe some of my colleagues wanted to say about the technological progress, like technological revolution in this time period, guys.
The only thing I can add is that I already stated that during Eastern Zhou period, the talent became possible, and so building of various canals and so on. Proves that. But to help Grisha, no, I cannot. Sorry.
No, but I think that might be exactly the right sort of thing, though, Asya. Like you just said, that they, as they develop more skill and better organization for using the labor to build canals and stuff, that these wetter lands were able to produce a lot more. And so there was a big draw. It's like someone going somewhere because there are better jobs there. You might go to Moscow because there are more job opportunities there. If you can grow more crops, if you go, 20 kilometers south, then maybe, as you get older, your children might set up a farm 20 kilometers south of you. And then their children or grandchildren might do it another 20 kilometers. And so, and they get, if they get into an area that has a little more water, a little more productive when you start using canals, and maybe that's the type of pressure that could push people in a particular direction to exploit the environment better for economic opportunity. So it makes sense, just what you were saying, Asya. Gregory, were there other scientific methods besides pedogenesis that were used, like maybe looking at carbon isotopes or pollen, something like that might have given some indication of increased agriculture over time, or decreased in some areas?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Grain size partially is not connected to biopetogenesis because it is about the different process of petogenesis, and it is about the different type of soil, like coming with wind from different places. Actually hinting us that the wind was not mild and aggressive in a way. But as for the pollen, no, I don't remember such things mentioned in the research article. There was no such thing as pollen mentioned. There was something with carbon, but I honestly did not understood it because this was purely technical part. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I mean, I know with corn, maize production in Mesoamerica, you can look for carbon isotopes that will appear associated with maize production. But I don't know enough about rice, which was the main crop here, that they domesticated, and I don't know what signatures, what the best chemical methods or paleoecological methods for doing reconstruction would be in a rice agricultural system. I don't know much about it. So I'm just curious, because it seems like it would be good to have different types of evidence supporting each other. Of course, makes a much stronger argument.
Right. Sorry, there was also a question from Dasha a long time ago.
Oh, did I miss that? Hold on, let me get my. Go ahead.
Just was interesting. So it's not a question about sources or information about Zhou Empire, but it's mostly like a general questions for you, or question for the researchers. So now China and Asian countries are very prospective and very interesting place. And does it the present situation in China and other neighbor countries have legacy of Zhou Empire, maybe in some cultural, in mindset, in political or economical legacy, something like that?
That's a good question.
Maybe I can start and somebody will add. I think that we didn't explore this thing very deep, however, I can say you for sure that that was the golden age of Chinese philosophy. So I think that is in the basis of Chinese culture. But I don't know, is it still like that or not? And so, and also ceramics, pottery, and all of that, they were also very well developed in, like, if we compare to other Chinese dynasties.
To add to Asa's point, as I know, Confucianism was like appear at this time, and it is like important still for Chinese like religion and so on, and also it spreads to the whole world and so on. And really philosophy like that starts in Zhou Dynasty period like still exists and still works. And also I'm not sure, but I know that this system with mandate of heaven like exists really exist later, and I'm not sure. I don't think that it is like present now in China, but still it influenced the history of China like later so much.
No, I think you guys are absolutely right. I mean, this is a really good question, and some of the things that became entrenched in Chinese culture, as you mentioned, Confucianism and some of the ideology, some of the arts and crafts with the bronze work and the ceramics, carried on for thousands of years, and even up to the time of the last emperor, who was swept up in the Maoist Cultural Revolution. There was the communist attempt to change a lot of those traditions, but I don't think it totally did. I think some became hybridized with Maoist communism, and some were changed, but many things still carry on as part of the Chinese identity. And certainly they have the roots back to Zhou and Shang dynasties, for sure. I think that's true.
And also during the Zhou Dynasty, writing system was improved so much, and it is also like influenced a lot because they like write about all meetings with king and original lord, and it is really like important for writing system in China.
Yeah,
thank you.
Go ahead.
No, I just want to say that, so thank you.
All right, are there any other questions? Let me find my participants again. Well, another excellent job. I got to say, I'm very impressed with everything that you guys have been presenting. I think you're putting together a lot of data and evidence to go along with the theory and looking at things, with some, a bit of skepticism on one hand, but also in looking for the correlations and the consistencies associated with these multi-causal ideas of collapse. Tomorrow at 12:30, we have the Persians, correct? Someone from Persia say yes?
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that unless there's any further questions, that we can go ahead and call the evening. I'll stay on for a little bit if anybody wants to talk about anything or has any specific questions that they want to ask of me. Is there something else? Oh, you saw that I added a new assignment for peer review for participation, that you should rate each other on a scale of 0 to 3 for your participation. So as a group, we can sit there and talk about it, and just be fair and honest, with each other. But I would say, everybody seems to be participating and carrying their weight from what I've been able to perceive and see in your presentations. And I would like those submitted by Friday. So the assignment should be up on Canvas. And aside from that, I'm going to wish you a good night, and I will see you tomorrow afternoon.